Hello, David Snopek here from Snopek Games. For the past few weeks, I've been working on adding WebXR support to the Godot game engine. There's still lots to do, but it's gotten to the point where it'd be useful for other folks to test it out and give feedback. So I made a written tutorial on Snopek Games about how to make a VR game for WebXR with Godot, and this is the video version of that same tutorial. Of course, if you prefer written tutorials, I'll put a link to that in the description below, and also note since Godot's WebXR support is still work in progress, there will be changes, and so these instructions may get out of date, so please check back on my website or YouTube channel for newer information. All right, so really quickly, what is WebXR and why should you care? Well, it allows you to visit a web page, press some Enter VR or Enter AR button, and then enter an immersive VR or AR experience on your VR headset, phone, or whatever futuristic glasses you may have 10 years from now. To demonstrate that, this is a looping GIF. Let's wait for it to get to the beginning. Here's the Oculus Quest browser where I'm on a web page. I click an Enter VR button, and then I am in an immersive 3D world surrounded by 3D planets. But why should you care? Making a VR app in a web page is a pretty weird thing to do. But there are some compelling use cases. So first of all, getting your VR app into walled gardens like the Oculus Quest. It's actually quite difficult to get an app into the Oculus Quest store, but the Oculus Quest browser has really great WebXR support, so an alternate way to get your app to people with the Oculus Quest is by making a WebXR app and asking them to go to a web page. It's easier to share experiences. There's no download or install. I know from doing game jams that if you make a web version of your game, people are way more likely to test it out and rate your game. It's the same thing here. If people don't have to download or install your app or experience, they're way more likely to try it. And WebXR supports a wide range of VR and AR devices, from the really high-end, like the Valve Index or HTC Vive or the Oculus Quest, down to Google Cardboard or just a plain cell phone. And you can support all of those devices with a single API. And this is more of an AR use case, which the WebXR support in Godot doesn't currently have AR support, but I'm planning to add it. It can allow you to go from web page to an immersive experience. For example, like if you were browsing like an online furniture store and you saw a piece of furniture you like, you could hit like an Enter AR button and then like on your phone see what that piece of furniture would look like in your house. So let's get started creating a VR game in Godot. All right, so I've just created a new project in Godot 3.2.3, and this is the initial screen you get. So the first thing we want to do is make a new 3D scene. We're going to rename this to main, and we are going to click this plus button to add an AR VR origin node. And to that node, we are going to add an AR VR camera, which is a camera that follows the headset. And we are going to add two AR VR controllers. We're going to name the first one left controller and the second right controller. And on the right controller, we are going to change the controller ID to 2. And then underneath each of these controllers, we are going to add a mesh instance node. So click the plus button, mesh instance. And in that mesh instance, we want to create a new cube mesh. Then click on it so we can edit the cube mesh, and we're going to change the size to 0.1 on each of the dimensions. So it's just this little cube down here. And then we're going to duplicate that, Control D to duplicate, and put another one underneath the right controller. I'm going to rename that to mesh instance rather than mesh instance 2, which is what the duplication automatically named it. So these two meshes are what's going to stand in for your hands in this VR experience until you have time to replace them with something better. All right, so this setup that we have here is basically the same that you would do for any VR game in Godot, whether that was for Steam or directly running on the Oculus Quest or whatever. This next part is something special that you need to do for WebXR. So we're going to again click on the main node and then the plus button to add a canvas layer. And in that canvas layer, we're going to add a button. And we are going to change the text in that button to say enter VR. So this is what's going to put the button on the screen where the user has to click it to consent to entering the immersive VR experience. And then that will allow us to switch to immersive VR mode. So to do that, we're going to add a script to our main node. So go to the main node, press the little attach script button. We'll click create. And we're going to place the code in here with some code from my tutorial on snowpeckgames.com. The link will be in the description below. And of course, we're going to walk through everything in this code. I'm not just going to ask you to do a code dump without explaining what any of it does. So let's drop this code in here. All right. So in the ready function, we are going to connect to that button and then go to this button pressed handler, which we'll get to a little bit later. But then we get to the sort of WebXR setup here, where we're grabbing the WebXR interface, saying find interface WebXR. If you were trying to target a different interface, like for working directly on the Oculus Quest, that's OVR Mobile, I think is the name of that one. Anyway, that's how you grab the different like APIs for doing AR or VR. In this case, we want the WebXR one. If we get it, then we're going to connect to a bunch of signals. Lots of stuff in WebXR is done with callbacks. Since this is a browser-based thing, if you were doing this natively, you'd be doing it in JavaScript. So you'd like call a method and expect to get like the response or know when that method is done by getting a callback. In Godot, we get that from connecting to signals. So we connect to like a session supported signal, which will respond to this is session supported call that we're doing down here. We want to see, does the device that you're accessing this web page support immersive VR? We could alternatively ask for immersive AR if we're making an AR experience, or there's also this viewer option, which is like a 3DOF viewer, which is not something that we're going to be doing today. We're just going to be doing immersive VR. And then also we have signals for when the session successfully starts, when the session ends, like if the user chooses to leave the immersive VR experience, which they can do usually from some special control in the web browser or in the headset or whatever, or if the session fails to start for some reason. All right, so we connect all these signals, and the first actionable thing we do is we ask if session is supported immersive VR, which calls back to this function here, which will give us the session mode that it's telling us is supported or not, and then a Boolean saying true or false. So if immersive VR is supported, we set this VR supported variable to that value. And then in the on button pressed method that responds to the button press signal, we check, if that VR supported variable is false, and then we give an alert. Your browser doesn't support VR. But assuming that's not the case, then we need to set up a bunch of properties to tell WebXR what kind of WebXR session we want. So we want an immersive VR session, that's the session mode. And then we give a list of requested space types. So there's a bunch of space types that WebXR supports, I think 5 or 6 of them. The ones that we care in the context of VR are bounded floor, which is like a room scale experience. You can actually get the dimensions of the sort of room scale guardian area that the person can walk around in, if that's important to your game. And if bounded floor isn't supported, basically this is going to kind of go down the list and say, first it's going to try bounded floor, and if that's not supported, then it'll go to local floor, which is more of a standing or sitting experience. If you're using a 3DOF device, it'll automatically just put you like sort of average head height above the ground, and then falling back ultimately on local, which is always supported, which just puts the headset at the origin, at the same position of whatever your AR/VR origin is. And in order for either bounded floor and local floor to actually work, we need to also set those here as required features or optional features. So here we're saying local floor is required, our app won't work without it, so then the session will actually fail to start if the device doesn't support local floor, and then optionally we support bounded floor. So this is sort of this graceful fallback from bounded floor all the way down to local. And then we call WebXR interface initialize, which actually goes and attempts to initialize the session using these properties we set. It will return true or false, just telling you if the initial attempt to initialize worked. You won't actually know if it really worked until the session started signal is emitted, which we have attached to this, which we have connected to this WebXR session started method, where first thing we do is we do this get viewport.arvr equals true. That tells Godot to start rendering to the headset as opposed to the screen, which in this case would be the browser window. And then here, this is just for demonstration purposes, we're outputting what reference space type we actually got. So if we got bounded floor, this would tell us bounded floor. If we got local floor, it would tell us local floor, just in case you want to actually change the way your game works, depending on which reference space is available. Also, if the WebXR session ended signal is emitted, then we set this get viewport ARVR to false, which will again tell Godot to start rendering back to the browser window instead of to the headset. And the session failed signal. If it fails, then we show an alert and give whatever the message was. So this is kind of the lowest level basics to make a WebXR experience work. So let me save this. Well, actually I have to save the scene and the script. So the scene got saved as main.tscn and the script is main.gd. There's one more step we have to do. We have to go to project settings. And then under application run, we have to set our main scene to main.tscn. So that's what scene should be open when this app starts. And the next part is we have to set up the export to HTML5 with a couple little changes for WebXR. So in my written tutorial here, you'll see that you can download a debug build or release build of the HTML5 export templates with my WebXR support added, since the PR to add WebXR support to Godot hasn't been merged yet. I hope it gets merged someday. And these are just zip files. I actually don't know where I have them personally, so I'm going to download them. I'm going to just save them to my downloads directory here. And now we have to set up the export. So back in Godot, we're going to go to project export, click add, and we want to add an HTML5 export, which I'm going to rename WebXR. And I'm going to tell it we want to compress textures for mobile, since this is kind of like a mobile experience, especially if you're going to try it on Oculus Quest, then it's definitely mobile. And then down here in custom template, we need to set the release and debug export templates to the ones we just downloaded. All right, and then next we need to copy and paste this little bit of HTML and JavaScript and put it in the head include here. What this is doing is it's loading the WebXR polyfill, which will fill in holes in your browser's WebXR support. So if it supports WebXR, but it's missing some feature or does some part of it off spec, then the WebXR polyfill will actually fix that so that it will work exactly as spec. And it will actually go as far as completely implementing WebXR. If you're using a web browser that, for example, only supports WebVR, it will make a whole WebXR implementation that uses WebVR under the hood. So you don't need to add this, but adding this will allow your experience to work, your VR experience or game to work on more web browsers. So now that this is all set up, we're going to click Export Project, and I'm going to make a build directory with a WebXR directory inside of it. That's just kind of a way that I usually structure my export directories in Godot. We're going to change the file to index.html just to make things easier for us, and click Save. All right, so that exported our WebXR game to that folder. WebXR only works through HTTPS. So the next thing we need to do is to set up a little temporary HTTPS server. I am personally using browser sync to do that. There's a whole bunch of ways to set up quick temporary HTTPS servers, or not quick or temporary ones. You could set up the full real deal too if you wanted to. But I'm just going to do that. I'm going to run browser sync. And that is running. And then rather than me putting on the headset, which would be really hard to show in a video, we are going to use the WebXR Emulator Extension in Firefox. So I'm going to visit the page. Oop. I got to remember HTTPS. And it cannot get slash. Come on. Do I have to do index.html? Oh, I know what I did. So I started this without actually going into the directory where the export was done. All right. This is how you know I'm not faking this. All right. And now it's loading our game here. You can see the Enter VR button. I'm going to just quick get up the WebXR emulator, which you do that by opening the web developer console and then clicking this WebXR tab, which gives you a little headset model. Now if I click Enter VR, you'll see it's now showing 2 images, one for each eye, and I can move the little headset around and you can see the view changing. So everything's working. So far, so good. So the next step is that we are going to handle input a little bit. So handling input with WebXR is just like handling input with any other VR interface in Godot. We need to connect to some signals on the controllers. So let me copy and paste this little bit of code that we need to add to our onReady function. This is getting the left controller and connecting to the button pressed signal and the button release signal, and having those go to these 2 methods, which we are also going to copy paste. Put that down at the end of the file and save this. And all these are doing is printing button pressed and outputting the button ID and then button release and the button ID. So let's export that again. Export. And we'll go back to our emulator, refresh the page, click Enter VR, and then now we can use these buttons over here to trigger some controller events. We put them on the left controller, so I have to come down to left controller here, and I'll press select and then undo it. And if we go over to the console, this is where the output comes in. So it says button pressed 3, button release 3. If I go back to WebXR, I can do button press for squeeze. Go look in the console, see it's just button press for button ID 0, and then we'll release it, and it is button release 0. So that's how you get just the buttons, the trigger, grip, the face buttons like A, B, X, Y, whatever. Getting the joysticks is also pretty easy, but a little weird. To do that, we're going to add a process function, which we're going to copy paste from my tutorial again. We'll put that down at the bottom here. And so this process function basically is doing input get joy access, giving the ID for the left controller, and then the ID for the thumbstick x-axis, and then also left controller ID and the axis ID for the Y thumbstick axis. And up here, we're just setting those. This is where it's a little bit weird, a little bit different than you would see with a different VR interface, where like if you're using the Oculus Mobile VR interface, the left controller is going to be joystick ID 0, and the right controller is going to be joystick ID 1. Well, in WebXR, for some complicated technical reasons that I talked about in one of my progress report videos, the left controller ID is 100, and the right controller ID is 101. So that's what we're using here. And then these other magic numbers, the thumbstick x-axis ID and y-axis ID of 2 and 3, you can get all of these magic numbers for the axes and the buttons from the WebXR spec, which I have linked in my written tutorial, and it also has this great image in the spec which shows you basically like everything you need to know. So you can see like the two face buttons are button ID 4 and 5, the trigger is button 0, the grip is button 1, and the axes, axes 0 and 1 are for a controller with a touchpad like Vive controllers, and axes 2 and 3 are for the thumbstick like Oculus touch controllers. So that's basically all there is to it. I'm also working on a demo, which is shown here below with race cars. You're driving like these little RC cars around a track. That whole demo, I have linked to the source code here. So if you want to see a complete example, if that would be useful for you in figuring out how to use this. But yeah, I'm excited to see what you make. If you have any problems, experience any bugs, let me know, and we'll work on getting them fixed and together make some really cool WebXR apps. So talk to you later. Bye-bye.